Welcome back to the CSC Garage. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to remove the seat, the side panels, and the tank of your SG250. And it's really easy to do with just a few simple tools, so let's get to it. Removing the seat is easy just by removing two fasteners from either side. I'm going to use a 12mm socket to remove those. And the bolt and washer came out. And then lift up. Now we're ready to remove the right side panel. Each side panel mounts a little differently. The right side has two pegs going in and then a flexible tab on the bottom. So I'm going to put some pressure on the top two corners to get those plastic pegs out of the rubber grommets. And you can see there is a little rubber grommet on the side panel in the bottom that mounts to this flexible plastic tab. So this one was relatively easy to get off. A trick is to put a little grease, just all-purpose grease, on these pegs before you put it back on. It makes removal and reinstall much easier. Removing the left side panel is similar to the right. There are two plastic pegs on both the top corners of the panel, but rather than there being a tab on the bottom, there's actually a metal rod coming off of the frame onto the diagonal side of this panel. So I want to be a lot more careful when I'm removing this left side. I will put a little pressure on each of the corners, but then I'm going to slide back. And once you get it off, you can see it's got a rubber grommet on the panel, but rather than on the bottom, on the left side, it's on the front. And this is the peg that it's sliding on. So same thing here on the reinstall, we'll put a little grease on each of these components, and it just makes it easier to slide back on. Removing the tank is also easy, it just requires a few simple steps. The first thing we want to do is make sure that the petcock is turned to the off position. No more fuel is leaving the tank to get to the carburetor. We can then disconnect the fuel line, and it may have a little ring, a little clamp on that hose. Slide that back and then pull the hose off. Now we're going to use a 10mm socket to remove these two fasteners. And I do have a little inner tube to serve as a spacer inside this rubber hat washer, and then the metal washer on top, and of course the screw goes down through those. Once those two fasteners are out of the way, we now have movability of the tank. There is a wire for us to be aware of. We want to unplug that. That's for the fuel gauge. And there's also a vent line. The wire's on the left side of the tank. I can kind of prop that up, and there's a quick disconnect on the electrical part of that. And then the vent line is going to a small plastic check valve on the right side. I simply slide back the hose clamp and remove the hose. And now as I lift the tank, you'll notice one more hose. That's a drain hose that's kind of snaked through the frame. It goes to nowhere. This is just the drain for the fuel cap area. If any excess or splash came over, it would allow that fuel to drain out under the motorcycle. Now we're ready to reinstall the tank. I'm going to first just kind of guide the longer hose. This was that drain hose that's going to hang to nowhere towards the bottom of the bike. This is for any overspill in the gas cap area. I'm just going to kind of feed it through the frame. And then the shorter hose is the vent hose. And this one is going to go to the check valve. And then my last connection, of course, is going to be the fuel gauge. And that's the electrical connection. This is going to go on the left side. Now we're ready to slide the fuel tank back on. You'll notice there are two ears on the inside of the tank. They're going to go over these two rubber spacers off of the frame. And now we're ready to align the rear of the tank. I'm going to use the rubber block and put it down, and then put my hardware and fasteners back in place. After I've installed the tank, I always like to double check and make sure there's going to be clearance from that upper clamp. Make sure your triple tree is clear on both sides and your tank's ready to go. Now I'm just going to move this drain line just kind of back in place. I just like to tuck it neatly under here, pull out any slack that's in it, and you can feed it where it's just hanging behind the engine. And now we're ready to reinstall our fuel line. This is coming from the carburetor and then going back to the petcock. So push it firmly back over the barb, and then we'll slide that hose clamp right back in place. Tuck it out of the way. Now we're ready to reinstall the left side panel. Remember, this is the one with the metal peg. I've already put some grease on there so things are a little smooth. I like to put it on the peg first, kind of wiggle it gently into place, and then I'm going to push those two pegs into the rubber grommets on both sides, and we're back on. And now the right side panel, which has the flexible tab, so it's a little easier. I've greased these as well. Put that bottom tab on first, and then push the grommets in place, and we're golden. Now we're ready to reinstall the seat. The front's going to slide in first, and then we lower the two tabs down in between these two rails. One thing I failed to mention when we were removing the seat, sometimes it's really tight and can be even hard to reinstall. If that's the case, you can always take some pressure off of that top mounting nut from the shock. Be sure you put it back on and torque it down correctly afterwards. But sometimes that'll alleviate enough pressure so that you can put it back in place. Otherwise, you can just tap it down, realign the tabs, and we'll use that 12mm socket to go ahead and put the fasteners in. Thanks for joining us once again at the CSC Garage. I enjoyed showing you just how easy it is to remove and reinstall the seat, side panels, and tank of your SG250. It only requires a few simple tools, and it's often very helpful if you need to access other parts that are behind or under these bulkier components. One thing I like about the SG250 is the center stand, which makes this bike stable to work on in almost any environment, and it's a fun one. So until next time, enjoy the ride.